Trying to tell the story of the name Maine is like trying to drive to Maine from Colorado. It looks straightforward, but when you actually try to do it, there are detours and toll roads and checkpoints. At one point, you might have to go through a whole different country, and, well, it just takes a while. But it's an entertaining trip, so if you'll bear with me, I promise we'll get to Maine, eventually.
Destination Banger, Maine.
Part 1, all aboard. Okay, so this is cool. There's a form of heraldry called punning or canting heraldry, where you basically use a play on words to represent the actual name reflected in the herald. So, for example, this is the official coat of arms of the Gorges family from the 13th century. While the word gorges in Old French refers to the throat and the act of swallowing, as in gorging on food, there's a Latin word, gurges, which means whirlpool. So this coat of arms is intended to be a pun, substituting the Latin word gurges for the noble family name Gorges. I mean, who knew that medieval knights were using their family crests to do the equivalent of a Saturday Night Live sketch?
What's all this fuss I keep hearing about violins and television?
The Gorges family traces its lineage back to Normandy, before William the Conqueror conquered England. In fact, there's still a village in northern France called Gorges, which is, in fact, the ancestral origin of the same family who established the aforementioned herald. There's even evidence that ancestors of the Gorges family fought with William at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. But 300 years later, that herald would be replaced by one line of the Gorges family, with the much less entertaining field of yellow and blue diamonds. And that herald would become the basis for one of the first legal challenges involving heraldic law in European history, the famous Warbleton v. Gorges case. You see, in 1347, both the Warbleton and Gorges families showed up to the siege of Calais bearing the same coat of arms. Think showing up to prom in the same dress as the head cheerleader, only everyone has swords. Anyway, the Earl of Lancaster, who was in charge of the siege, convened a 6-man jury to decide who got to keep the herald. Now, forgive me, but I love the idea of pausing the siege of this city to decide which family gets to put the blue and gold design on their shields. Well, it turns out Warbleton did. And so henceforth, the Gorges herald, instead of looking like this, or this, looked like this. Part 2. Okay, but Maine? So, fast forward about 200 more years. One Sir Ferdinando Gorges, the undisputed founder of Maine, was born around 1568, though I'm legally obligated to tell you because almost everything I've ever read about the man makes clear that he never actually traveled to Maine, nor to either American continent. His family had a long history of nobility and military service, and owned property all over the southern English counties of Somerset, Dorset, and Devon. In 1589, Gorges was knighted by the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux. Several years later, in 1601, Devereux would be found guilty and beheaded for what historically is referred to as the Essex Rebellion, which was a pretty anemic attempt to dethrone Queen Elizabeth I. Sir Ferdinando Gorges got caught up in that rebellion, but redeemed himself by confessing and then testifying against his erstwhile friend and patron, the Earl of Essex. After Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, James VI of Scotland inherited the throne, becoming James I of England. 2 years later, in 1605, Sir Ferdinando and the other investors in the Plymouth Company, a joint stock company for the purpose of establishing colonies in North America, sent Sea Captain George Weymouth to scout out a good spot for a colony. One of Weymouth's goals was to secure some natives to bring back to England. Now, horrifying as it was, kidnapping Native Americans was actually standard practice for European adventurers in the New World, and Weymouth did not disappoint. He captured 5 Abenaki natives and took them to England, where 3 of them lived for over a year in the household of Sir Ferdinando Gorges. The other 2 were hosted by Sir John Popham, Lord Chief Justice of England. The Abenaki men were exhibited to potential investors in the Plymouth Company and were taught English in the hopes that they would serve as guides and translators for later colonists. Well, this plan, as you might imagine, backfired. In 1607, Sir John Popham's nephew, George Popham, took a group of settlers to what is now Maine, where at least one of the kidnapped natives was returned to his family. But instead of helping the colonists, the man, as you might imagine, warned his people not to trust the English, and in fact encouraged them to work at cross purposes with the settlers. How much that contributed to the failure of the so-called Popham or Sagahatuk colony is not clear, but fail it did, and Sir Ferdinando would not try again to colonize in New England for more than 10 years. Part 3. Are we there yet? In the meantime, Jamestown was established the same year that the Popham colony failed, and in 1620 the Mayflower landed at what became Plymouth Colony, though it had no connection to the Plymouth Company in which Gorges was invested. In 1622, Sir Ferdinando and his friend, Captain John Mason, the undisputed founder of New Hampshire, were granted a land patent. This is the first time the name Maine is mentioned as a potential English colony in America. The patent is titled, "A Grant of the Province of Maine to Sir Ferdinando Gorges and John Mason, Esquire, 10th of August, 1622. The boundaries of this land grant were, shall we say, confused. One of my favorite quotes on this subject comes from historian George Plummer Hadley when discussing the Council for New England, another British colonizing effort. The council gave what they never owned, set bounds to that which had never been seen, fixed lines that had never been surveyed, and laid the foundation for countless quarrels and much trouble in future years." Now, while Gorges met with little success in actually planting a colony, settlements did pop up in the region that he technically controlled. Often small fishing villages and people moving north from Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Gorges did maintain his hold on the patent, dividing it from Captain John Mason and then having it reconfirmed to him by King Charles I in 1629 and then again in 1639. And it is this 1639 patent that is always quoted when discussing how the name Maine got affixed to the region it now names. See, until 1639, Gorges had tried out several names for potential colonies. There was Ligonia, a name honoring his mother, Cecily Ligon Gorges, and Laconia, when he believed he would find the mythical Lake of the Iroquois. Get it? Lake-onia? But Gorges had settled on the name New Somersetshire.
And for our American viewers, it's pronounced Shire, not Shire.
Actually, it's pronounced Shire, not Sheer, plebs.
After his home county, which made sense given that his former partner had named his own colony New Hampshire after his home county in England. Now, it's not exactly clear what the king had against the name New Somersetshire. It could be that it was just a mouthful. I mean, even the name of the county in England has since been shortened to Somerset. But it appears that King Charles did, in fact, object to that name, because in the 1639 charter, he commands that the portion of the Maine land and premises aforesaid shall forever hereafter be called the province or county of Maine, and not by any other name or names whatsoever. So, yeah, no matter how you spelled it, the name would be Maine. Got it, Your Majesty. Part 4. Don't make me turn this car around. So, the question has always been, why? Why Maine? Where did that name come from? And for many years, two theories dominated the speculation. The first was that it was named after the French province of Maine as a compliment to Queen Henrietta Maria, wife of King Charles I, who owned Maine. This theory, however, has been thoroughly debunked because in 1622, when the name appears on the first charter granted to Gorges, then Prince Charles was not yet married to Henrietta Maria. He was, in fact, engaged to someone else at the time. Also, Henrietta Maria not only didn't own Maine, but apparently had no connection to it whatsoever. The second theory was that it was named Maine as in mainland. The problem with this theory is that the word Maine was used to describe any part of any continent that wasn't just an island. Ever heard of the Spanish Main? Basically, South America? Why would this particular spot warrant elevating that word to a proper noun? So now we arrive at a new theory that was originally posited by Carol B. Smith Fisher, a Maine historian who has become a friend of mine. In 2002, Smith Fisher published a column in the Bangor Daily News that points to a small fishing village just south of the city of Dorchester on the southern coast of Great Britain. This village is called Broadmain, to distinguish it from a small nearby farm called Parva, Maine, Parva being Latin for little. But historically, and in the Domesday Book of 1086, the whole area was called simply Maine, and was, in fact, among the ancestral homelands of Sir Ferdinando Gorges. Smith Fisher admits that more research is needed, and it is possible that any real explanation for the choice of the name Maine has been lost to time. But as she says in the conclusion of her article, does it not ring true that our 17th century English knight would want to bless the future American homeland of the Gorges family with the ancient name of their first English village, Maine? Part 5, Caravanning. So here's a trivia question. Was Maine one of the first 13 colonies? And all you Mainers out there, don't give it away for the rest of the class. The answer, of course, is
it is a trick question.
Because for over a century, Maine was what many historians call a colony of a colony, which is to say, it was part of Massachusetts. While it was called Maine, after around 1622, with the first colonial patent granted to Ferdinando Gorges and John Mason, the region roughly north and east of the Piscataqua River was fought over not only by England and France, but also by Massachusetts, local colonists, and of course the Native Americans who had lived there for centuries. It went through lots of permutations, including the short-lived Dominion of New England in the late 1600s, and of course the American Revolution when the British tried to keep hold of it. In fact, during both the Revolution and the War of 1812, the British referred to Maine as New Ireland and attempted to establish it as a home for Loyalists. But due to the efforts of patriots like the Reverend Seth Noble, and yes, I am going to plug my friend's book because it's a fascinating read, Maine remained in the American fold. Through it all, however, it was claimed by Massachusetts as the District of Maine of Massachusetts, and was generally governed accordingly. Conclusion. We've arrived. Now what? Finally, in 1819, Maine voted to separate from Massachusetts and applied for statehood. In 1820, with the signature of President James Monroe, it became the 23rd state, joining Missouri in the famous Missouri Compromise, which dictated that any new free state must be paired with a new slave state. Honestly, I think it should have been called the Maine-Missouri Compromise, but they don't listen to me. Maine's borders wouldn't be finally settled until the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842 dictated its international border with Canada. So we made it. Maine. Carol, how'd I do?